What if tomorrow morning you woke up to a push alert on your phone? Nuclear weapons used in the Middle East. Iran and Israel have crossed a line the world hoped never to see. Would it remain a regional tragedy? Or would your life in America change before dinner? This is not a prediction, and it is not a scare tactic. It is a thought exercise with a purpose. Because if you can imagine the first hours and the days that follow, you can prepare your mind and your home. So ask yourself right now, if this happened while you slept, what would you wish you had done yesterday? And are you ready to find out what that answer might be? Welcome to What If, a new safety zone series, where we simulate possible crises based on real-world facts and credible reporting. We are not forecasting the future, and we are not dealing in rumors. We are building realistic scenarios so you are never blindsided. Every episode begins with a simple question. If this happened, what would it look like for the United States and for you? To stay responsible, we ground every step in sources you already know. Outlets like Reuters, the BBC, Al Jazeera, and official briefings from agencies such as the International Atomic Energy Agency, which monitors nuclear programs, and the U.S. Energy Information Administration, which tracks global oil flows. When we mention a concept you may not use every day, we explain it briefly in plain language. The goal is not to frighten you. The goal is to help you think ahead, because preparedness begins with clarity. The clearer the picture, the better your decisions under pressure. Today we ask a tough question. If Iran and Israel traded nuclear strikes, how would the first hours unfold? How would the shock travel through energy markets, satellites, and shipping lanes? And how fast would it reach American homes? If you have ever wondered whether a faraway flash could change your grocery bill, your commute, your bank account, and your sense of safety, you are in the right place. Stay with me and measure each step against your own life, because by the end, I want you to have 3 takeaways. What to watch for, what to expect, and what to start doing now. Why begin here? Because this is not an imaginary rivalry. It is a long arc of real hostility backed by real capabilities. Israeli leaders from different governments have called a nuclear-armed Iran an existential threat. Iranian leaders have invested in ballistic missiles and a nuclear program that the International Atomic Energy Agency has repeatedly inspected and flagged whenever enrichment levels rose beyond civilian norms. According to Reuters and the BBC, the region has already seen cycles of drone and missile exchanges, covert operations, and strikes on infrastructure tied to Iranian proxies, Hezbollah in Lebanon, militias in Syria and Iraq, even Houthi forces in Yemen. Israel also has a record of preventive action against nuclear facilities, from the Osirak strike in Iraq in the early 1980s to the attack on a suspected reactor site in Syria in the 2000s. In Israeli doctrine, preemptive action is not theory, it is precedent. The United States is Israel's principal security partner and maintains forces and bases across the region, from the Mediterranean to the Gulf. NATO allies are deeply invested in Middle Eastern stability because energy flows from this region set the price of the global economy. And Iran sits next to the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow channel through which a significant share of the world's seaborne oil passes. The U.S. Energy Information Administration has described Hormuz as a critical choke point. Close it and tanker traffic snarls, insurance premiums explode, and prices jump. Add one more layer, the information domain. Western intelligence and open source analysts have documented GPS jamming and cyber operations radiating from the region during past crises. This means that in any sharp escalation, the battles you do not see, the ones in the electromagnetic spectrum and in server rooms, will unfold alongside the missiles you do see. In short, of all the flashpoints on the map, Iran and Israel combine hostile intent, military capability, geography that touches the world's energy heart, and alliances that could pull in the United States quickly. If there is a place where a nuclear exchange could reverberate globally within hours, this is it. So the question becomes, if the unthinkable happened, how would those first hours actually play out? Picture the clock striking 6 in the morning on the East Coast, Television anchors interrupt regular programming. Social feeds flood with conflicting clips, some real and some manipulated. The first official confirmations trickle in. Emergency statements from Jerusalem and Tehran. The White House announces that the National Security Council is meeting. The Pentagon raises alert levels at regional bases, and allied governments from London to Berlin call emergency sessions. Markets are global and they wake up fast. Crude oil futures spike within minutes. Airlines suspend routes into and out of the eastern Mediterranean. Maritime authorities issue security notices, and insurers begin rewriting the cost of risk across the Gulf. That is the visible layer. Underneath, two invisible processes start at once. The first is the information storm. State media push their narratives, bots amplify rumors, and your feed becomes a minefield. The second is the push and pull in space and cyberspace. Satellite operators monitor interference on communications and navigation signals. Cybersecurity agencies in the United States prepare for probes on power grids and pipelines. If you need a reminder that cyber can hit daily life, think of the Colonial Pipeline incident, a criminal operation that temporarily strangled fuel supply along the East Coast. Now imagine such pressure timed to coincide with a geopolitical shock. In the region itself, Israel's missile defenses would be challenged by follow-on salvos from Iranian territory or allied militias. Iran would brace for Israeli, and perhaps U.S., strikes on command nodes and launch sites. Civil defense networks would activate shelter protocols, sirens, evacuation orders near targeted zones, and requests to conserve power to keep grids stable. For those unfamiliar with nuclear vocabulary, a tactical nuclear weapon is a lower yield device intended for battlefield use rather than for city-busting strategic use. Still, any detonation is catastrophic in both human and strategic terms. Even a single use shatters the nuclear taboo that has held since 1945. The first hours in the United States would feel ambiguous and tense. You would not see planes overhead. You would see prices on your news ticker lurch violently. You would see your airline send you a text that your flight is canceled. You would see your bank app slow or fail as digital traffic spikes. And you would get questions from your family that deserve calm answers. Here's the first mini recap. The first wave is about shock and signal, shock to markets and nerves, signal in the form of alerts and emergency statements that tell you which way the wind might blow. If you only remember one thing about the first hours, remember this: speed and clarity are rare, confusion is normal, and your job is to focus on verified channels. Follow White House briefings, FEMA notices, and the wireless emergency alerts that can reach your phone even when networks are stressed. The question is, would you know which messages to trust? And do you have a plan to contact your loved ones if the networks lag? After the first shock comes the second wave, the one that crawls into every corner of the global system. Energy is the first lever. The Strait of Hormuz may not close entirely, but even the risk of mines and missiles in its lanes sends freight rates through the roof. According to Reuters and the Financial Times, insurers in prior Gulf crises dramatically increased premiums, which translated into higher prices at the pump weeks later. Multiply that effect by a nuclear exchange and a regional mobilization, and the energy curve bends sharply upward. When energy rises, everything priced in diesel and gasoline rises too: groceries, construction materials, delivery costs. The second lever is finance. New York and London are not bombed, but they are not immune. High-frequency moves break models, margin calls ripple through portfolios, and ordinary Americans see retirement accounts shed value. The third lever is food. The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization has shown how energy and fertilizer costs pass through to bread and meat prices. Add shipping delays, port security checks, and diverted routes around risky waters, and shelves begin to thin. Not empty like an apocalypse movie, thin, inconsistent, unreliable. The fourth lever is information integrity. Hostile actors will try to turn panic into policy by seeding false reports, fake radiation maps, fake evacuation orders, deepfake clips in your feed that look official. This is where the lesson from recent years matters. The platform on your phone is a delivery system for fear as much as for facts. The fifth lever is diplomacy. Calls for restraint escalate into high-stakes bargaining. Washington pressures partners to de-escalate. Moscow and Beijing position themselves as power brokers. And the entire map holds its breath to see if the line has been crossed once or whether a chain reaction has just begun. Here is the mini recap. The second wave is not dramatic in a single image. It is thousands of small cuts to confidence that add up to a different world. You may not remember the day the price of rice doubled, but you will remember that you stopped trusting the store to have what you needed. You may not remember the day flight routes changed, but you will remember that visiting family across the country became harder. And in this fog, two questions hang over American households. How long could we operate if our budgets were squeezed for months? And how do we filter noise from signal when everyone has a megaphone? What does this look like at street level in America? Imagine the first weekend after the news breaks. Gas lines form in a few regions simply because people rush to top off, and this behavior itself creates shortages. Grocery stores see buyers grab shelf-stable items and bottled water. Pharmacies get calls for early refills of essential medications. Some areas impose temporary purchase limits to keep supplies available. Local officials give measured guidance, but rumors fly faster. Some banks shorten hours while they stress test systems under heavy digital load. Power utilities remind customers that rolling outages can be used to balance grids if cyber pressure or supply constraints spike. Aviation authorities issue notices about GPS unreliability and route adjustments. The Federal Aviation Administration and airline apps push advisories that cascade into your weekend plans. Schools and workplaces dust off emergency communication trees, and families rediscover the old question: if we could not reach each other by text, what is our backup? Here is where a few American systems matter. The Wireless Emergency Alerts Network can push a government message to your phone even when normal service is unstable. The Emergency Alert System can interrupt radio and television. A NOAA weather radio can receive official broadcasts independent of the internet. The point is not that you will need all of these at once. The point is that redundancy turns panic into patience. On the medical side, many Americans rely on cold chain medications and just-in-time pharmacy flows. Ask yourself, do you have a cushion for your prescriptions? Speak to your doctor before you need it, and ask about extended refills or emergency supplies that are legal and safe. On the food side, think less about hoarding and more about smoothing your consumption. An extra week or two of shelf-stable staples, rice, beans, pasta, canned proteins, cooking oil, can take the edge off price spikes without depriving neighbors. On the financial side, consider that electronic payments depend on networks and power. Having some cash on hand is not paranoia. It is common sense in any storm. And yes, even radio matters again. A small hand crank or battery-powered radio gives you a line to official updates if your phone dies. The details here are not glamorous. They are simple and often ignored. Ask yourself right now, could you go 3 days if you could not buy anything? Could you cook without your usual appliances? Do you know your neighbors well enough to share and swap if delivery's slow? Small yes answers to these questions add up to big resilience. And that is the difference between watching panic on television and living calmly through a hard month. This is not a tutorial for building a bunker. It is a guide for building margin. Margin in time, margin in supplies, and margin in decisions. Start with water. Emergency managers in the United States often suggest at least 1 gallon per person per day for drinking and basic hygiene. A simple mix of stored bottles and a gravity filter or chemical purification tablets gives you a plan A and a plan B. Next comes light and power. A small solar charger for phones and a set of rechargeable batteries with a basic charger turns silence into communication. A compact camping stove with proper ventilation and safe practices turns stored food into meals. When we talk about EMP, an electromagnetic pulse that can be generated by a nuclear detonation at altitude or by powerful solar events, the takeaway for a household is not to fear science fiction. It is to think about analog backups for critical tasks. printed maps, a paper list of contacts, a basic analog thermometer for your fridge and freezer. For fallout, the household lesson is the trio of time, distance, and shielding. The more time that passes after a release, the safer it becomes. The more distance and dense mass between you and the radiation, the more protection you have. A basement or an internal room away from windows can be a decent shield in a pinch. Potassium iodide can protect the thyroid from radioactive iodine when advised by public health officials. But it is not a magic pill. Never self-medicate without guidance. For communications, decide today on a family check-in plan that does not depend on one app. Agree on a time and a place to reconnect if networks fail. For money, a small cash buffer and a line of credit you can access if payroll is disrupted can bridge a stressful week. For community, introduce yourself to the people on your block before there is a crisis. Share skills when calm, because in a long emergency, the best prep is a trusted neighbor. Here's a quick mini recap. Preparedness for a nuclear crisis far away is not about surviving a blast. It is about absorbing the shockwaves that reach you. You build that capacity with redundancy, simple tools and relationships, and you maintain it by practicing when stakes are low. Cook a dinner on your backup stove once. Run your radio and find local frequencies. Rotate your pantry items so nothing expires. Keep your gas tank above half as a habit. Then ask yourself, if you had to shelter in place for 72 hours, are you confident? If you had to stretch your pantry for a month with fresh items scarce, could you plan meals without stress? If the answer is no, the good news is that you can change that this week with modest steps and little money. This was one scenario, a what-if built on real trends and real vulnerabilities. Iran and Israel are not just names on a map. They are forces that can tug on American lives through energy, finance, information, and fear. Today you saw how the first hours would look noisy and unclear, how the second wave would touch your budget and your routine, and how a few calm choices can turn a frightening headline into a manageable challenge. The bigger lesson travels with you beyond this episode. Crises do not always arrive with sirens. Sometimes they arrive with a text that does not load and a card that does not swipe. Sometimes they arrive with a rumor that feels true simply because you are tired. The whole point of What If is to remove the surprise without removing the seriousness. So let me leave you with two questions and one invitation. First, if tomorrow brought a shock you did not expect, do you have a plan to keep your family safe and connected? Second, if next week brought shortages and price spikes, do you have enough margin to make measured choices? The invitation is simple. If you found value here, subscribe to Safety Zone, turn on notifications, and join this community of level-headed Americans who prepare without panic. In the next What If, we will explore a different flashpoint and once again translate it into consequences you can understand and steps you can take. Because reality will keep changing, and we will keep asking, what if and what now?